Hello and welcome to Unexplained Possibilities Top 10 Alien Encounters. I'm your host, Melvin the CrimsonTaurus, and let's get into it, shall we? Coming in at number 10 on our list is Frederick Valentich. In Australia, about 7 p.m. on October 21st, 1978, Frederick Fred Valentich, who had left Victoria's Moonrabin Airport at 6:19 p.m., was piloting a light airplane, a rented single-engine Cessna 182L, registration VHDSJ, over Bass Strait heading southeastwardly for King Island when what he thought was another aircraft seemed to pass over him. Valentich radioed Melbourne Air Flight Service and spoke with controller Steve Roby. The communication ended after 6 minutes, with Valentich's last words being, "My intentions are, to go to King Island. Melbourne, that strange aircraft is hovering on top of me again. It is hovering, and it's not an aircraft." Although an intensive air, land, and sea search was carried out until October 25th, no trace of the Cessna was found. An oil slick discovered on October 22nd, some 18 miles north of King Island, was not established as having any connection with Valentich's plane. The Bureau of Air Safety Investigation released its findings in May 1982, stating that the reason for the disappearance of the aircraft has not been determined, but that the outcome was presumed fatal. Interestingly, Valentich was enthralled with UFOs, watching films and accumulating articles on the topic. Earlier that year, according to his father, Valentich had himself observed a UFO moving away very fast. He had expressed to his father his worry about what could happen if such presumed extraterrestrial craft should ever attack. His deep belief in flying saucers may have contributed to his disappearance. Number 9 on our list is Robert Taylor. Robert Taylor, a forestry worker for the Livingston Development Corporation, on November 9, 1979, had parked his pickup truck at the side of a road near the M8 motorway and walked along a forest path up the side of Detchmont Law with his dog. Taylor reported seeing what he described as a flying dome, or a large circular sphere approximately 7 yards in diameter, hovering above the forest floor in a clearing about 530 yards away from his truck. Taylor described the object as a dark metallic material with a rough texture like sandpaper, featuring an outer rim set with small propellers. Taylor claims he experienced a foul odor like burning brakes, and that smaller spheres, similar to sea mines, had seized him and were dragging him in the direction of the larger object when he lost consciousness. According to Taylor, he later awoke and the objects were gone, but he could not start his truck, so he walked back to his home in Livingston. Taylor's wife reported that when he arrived home on foot, he appeared disheveled and muddy with torn clothing and ripped trousers. His wife called the police and a doctor, who treated him for grazes to his chin and thighs. Police accompanied Taylor to the site where he claimed he received his injuries. They found ladder-shaped marks in the ground where Taylor said he saw the large spherical object, and other marks that Taylor said were made by the smaller, mine-like objects. Police recorded the matter as a criminal assault. One last interesting bit of detail is the Robert Taylor incident is the only example of an alien sighting becoming the subject of a criminal investigation. Coming in at number 8 on our list, Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker. On October 10, 1973, 15 different people, including 2 policemen, reported seeing a large silver UFO slowly fly over a housing project in St. Tammany Parish, New Orleans, Louisiana. 24 hours later, Charles Hickson and Calvin Parker would have the scare of their lives. The two men were co-workers, both from the town of Goitier, Mississippi, and were fishing in the Pascagoula River at 9 p.m. They suddenly heard a type of buzzing behind them. Both men turned around to see the source of the sound and were amazed to see a glowing, egg-shaped object with bluish lighting on its front side. The craft was hovering only a few feet above the ground and about 30 feet from the shore of the river. To their shock, a door opened in the object and three strange beings began to float just above the water straight toward them. Though the beings had legs, they did not use them. They simply floated across the river. Parker and Hickson would later describe the beings as about 5 feet tall, had bullet-shaped heads without necks, slits for mouths, and where their noses or ears would be, they had thin, conical objects sticking out, like carrots from a snowman's head. They had no eyes, gray wrinkled skin, round feet, and claw-like hands. Hickson, frozen in fear and unbelief, was grabbed by two of these creatures, and the third one took Parker, who fainted from fright. Hickson would later relate that when the beings put their arms under his body to support him, he felt numb all over. He was then floated into a brightly lit room inside of the UFO. Inside this room, he floated along with an eye-like device which examined him all over. After his examination, Hickson was left floating, while the beings left the room to examine Parker. 20 minutes after everything had begun, it was over, and Hickson was floated back outside of the strange craft. Parker was crying and praying on the ground, according to Hickson. Only a moment or two later, the craft rose straight up into the air and disappeared. As the two men began to regain their composure, they were uncertain as to what they should do. Reluctant to report their harrowing experience, they felt obligated to tell someone. Despite fearing ridicule, they phoned Kessler Air Force Base in Biloxi. Kessler referred their problem to their local sheriff's office. Afraid of what reaction they might get from law enforcement, they opted instead to drive to their local newspaper. Finding the office closed, they decided to take their bizarre story to the sheriff after all. The sheriff felt the two men's story was some kind of hoax, and to get the truth out, he put Hickson and Parker into a room which was wired for sound, hoping that they would slip up and reveal why they were perpetrating such a strange tale. Within a few days, the Pascagoula incident was major news all over the U.S. The Aerial Phenomena Research Organization sent University of California professor James Harder to investigate. Dr. J. Allen Hynek, representing the U.S. Air Force, also arrived to look into the story. Harder and Hynek interviewed Hickson and Parker together. Harder hypnotized Hickson, but he became so frightened that the session had to be aborted. The two abductees were encouraged to take a lie detector test, which they both passed. Harder and Hynek, both highly respected in their professions, believed the two men's story. At a later date, Hynek stated, "There was definitely something here that was not terrestrial." The Allagash abductions comes in at number 7 on our list. On Friday night, August 20th, 1976, 4 young art students left Boston, Massachusetts for a canoe and camping trip in the area of northern Maine along the Allagash River. The group consisted of identical twins Jack and Jim Weiner, Charles Foltz, and Chuck Rack. On the evening of Thursday, August 26, the group reached Eagle Lake and decided to go night fishing. The pitch darkness of the area necessitated the building of a huge bonfire to mark their campsite so that they can find their way back to it. Shortly after beginning to fish, Chuck had a feeling of being watched. Acting on the feeling, Chuck looked toward the direction from where he felt this and saw a large bright spear of colored light hovering motionless and soundless about 200 to 300 feet in the air. Chuck yelled for the others to look behind them. Rising above the trees was a huge, oval, glowing object. Charlie grabbed the flashlight and blinked it at the object. Instantly, the huge, rising, glowing object came to an abrupt halt and began to slowly approach the canoe. Simultaneously, a tube-shaped beam of light erupted from the object and hit the water. The object and its beam of light began moving toward the canoe. Terrified, the group began paddling toward their bonfire and camp as the beam went across the lake directly at them and engulfed them. Chuck Rack remembers staying in the canoe after the others had piled out in panic onto the shore. Transfixed, still holding his idle paddle, he could not take his eyes off the object. Jack and Jim were able to consciously remember a bit more. Jack said that it was just behind us, and I could see that we were never going to outrun the beam. It was advancing too fast, and I remember thinking, "Holy shoot, this is it. We'll never get away." The next thing I knew, we were on the shore, getting out of the canoe looking directly at the object, which was now about 20 or 30 feet above the water. The beam was coming out of the bottom of it like the object was sitting on the beam. It hovered there, right in front of us, completely silent for what seemed like 4 or 5 minutes. Suddenly, the beam was pointing up towards the sky. The object began to move up and away from us towards the southwestern sky and then shot into the stars and was gone in just a second. Jim Weiner said that there was no mistake that it was coming directly to us. Then I remember standing on the lakeshore watching the object hovering above the lake 50 to 75 yards in front of us. Then the search beam went upward into the sky and we saw it moving away at tremendous speed. We all seemed to be in a state of shock. We just stood there, unable to move or talk. Years later, Jim suffered a head injury which caused a type of epilepsy. During treatment, Jim's doctors asked him to report any unusual experiences that might be symptomatic of his condition. Jim described the experiences that he and his friends had since his encounter. These included awakening at night to see strange creatures, levitation from bed, and temporary paralysis while something was done to the genitals. He also described their encounter with the UFO and the period of missing time. Jim's doctors advised him to contact the UFO researcher as they felt that Jim and his friends may have been involved in a UFO abduction experience. Under hypnosis, all 4 witnesses relived detailed and traumatic UFO abduction experiences during the period of missing time. All were transferred from their canoe into the UFO by the hollow tube-like beam of light. On board, they encountered strange humanoid creatures that exerted some kind of mind control over them so that they could not resist their demands. All were made to undress and sit on plastic-like bench in an area illuminated by diffuse white light. After looking at their eyes and in their mouths with a pencil-sized rod with a light on its tip, the aliens placed them in a harness and flexed their arms and legs. Then, one by one, they were made to lie on a table where each was examined by a number of strange handheld and larger machine-like instruments that were lowered over their bodies. During this segment of the examination, the alien entities removed samples of saliva, skin scrapings, blood, feces, urine, and sperm from each of the abductees. After the examinations, the abductees were made to dress and enter another room which had a round portal in one of its walls. They were lined up, made to walk into the portal. Strange sensations surged through their bodies as they found themselves floating down the hollow beam of light into their canoe, which was now in shallow water near their campsite. The tube-like light seemed to hold the canoe steady as each was placed in it in the same seating position they were in prior to the abduction. At the number 6 spot is Whitney Schreiber. In upstate New York on the evening of December 26, 1985, fiction writer Whitney Schreiber had a visit by non-human beings. He wrote about this experience and several other related experiences in Communion, his first non-fiction book. Schreiber was already a well-known author when he was vacationing with his wife and son over the Christmas holidays in an isolated cabin. The lonely setting of the cabin caused him to have concerns for his family's safety, and so he had installed a security system. At 11 p.m. on the 26th of December, Schreiber activated the security system and he and his family went to bed for the night. A couple of hours passed and Schreiber was awakened by an unusual sound. Schreiber felt that someone had broken in. He was soon shocked to see a creature in his bedroom. After this, the next thing Schreiber knew, he was in the woods which surrounded his cabin. His memories of what had occurred were fragmented. Eventually, to re-establish memories of that night and understand what had really happened, Schreiber would undergo regressive hypnosis by Dr. Donald F. Klein. The hypnotic regression would uncover many of the details of his experience. Schreiber recalled that he had been floated out of his bedroom and into a waiting UFO. He would see several different types of alien beings. One, a small robot type of being, the second one, a short, stocky type, and the third was very slender and weak-looking, but had mesmerizing black eyes that slanted, and the last being had black, button eyes. Schreiber claims that he was subjected to medical testing by these aliens. One of these was the insertion of a needle into his brain, and another involved an object being inserted into his rectum. The beings took a blood sample from him by making an incision in his finger. The recounting of the most bizarre facts caused Dr. Klein to diagnose Schreiber with temporal lobe epilepsy. This condition can cause one to have hallucinations. Schreiber did not accept the diagnosis and recounted his abduction as a real event. He would eventually establish a foundation as a support group for alien abductees. In the 5 spot is Charles L. Moody. Sergeant Charles L. Moody was in the Alamogordo area of New Mexico on August 13, 1975. It was 1:30 a.m. and Sergeant Moody was in the area in order to observe a meteor shower. Moody noticed a strange orange light off in the distance and realized it was a metallic object falling to Earth. The object stopped before hitting the ground and hovered. The object began to move steadily towards him, and he observed that there were shadows that appeared to be human-like figures in the windows. Moody raced to his car but found that the vehicle wouldn't start. As the craft grew closer, he heard a high-pitched humming sound and felt his body begin to go numb. After a few moments, he regained himself and saw that the craft had left the area. Moody drove home immediately to discover that it was now 3 a.m. He had lost at least an hour and a half of time during the incident. After the events, Moody had lower back pain and a strange rash on his body. Under the direction of a physician, he attempted self-hypnosis in order to recall what exactly had happened in that time period. Within a few weeks, he was able to put together a memory of what had happened to him that night. Moody recalled that the numb feeling fell over his body. He could recall 2 beings approaching his car, though he couldn't tell how they had even gotten to the ground. They were about 6 feet tall and wore some sort of black skin-tight suit. After a brief scuffle, he was rendered unconscious by them. Next, he awoke on an examination table of some sort, presumably inside the spacecraft. Once inside, he identified the leader, who was shorter than the other 2, and this time wore a silver white suit. They all had white-gray skin, small ears, big heads, small noses, and no lips. Their eyes were large and dark. The creature communicated telepathically with Moody and asked if he was ready to behave peacefully. Moody agreed, and the creature removed his temporary paralysis. He was then taken around the alien ship and shown some of his technology. The aliens related that their mothership was far away from Earth, but in the solar system, and that they would return for him in 20 years. At number 4 is Travis Walton. 18-year-old lumberjack Travis Walton was working in Arizona in 1975. He and his co-workers were returning from work one evening in a pickup truck when they noticed a strange light brightly shining through the trees of the forest. Approaching to get a better look, they were amazed to see a flying saucer hovering just above the forest and illuminating an eerie light on everything within range. While Walton's colleagues didn't want to investigate and stayed back, Walton, being curious and brave, walked up to the mysterious craft. Once Walton was close to the craft, he examined its metallic hull and heard what could be described as machinery coming from inside. After a few seconds, he appeared to be struck by an energy beam coming from the craft. The energy beam flung him forcefully up into the air and knocked him backwards. Walton's friends fled in terror, assuming that they were about to be attacked. Running back to the truck, they sped through the country roads back towards town before returning and looking for Travis. Searching the area, they found the craft was gone and no sign of Walton. They returned to town and spread the word about what had happened. The local authorities were skeptical and suspicious that Walton might have been murdered, and the friends used the UFO story as a cover. The sheriff told the news to Walton's mother. However, he was taken aback by her calm demeanor. Search parties searched the site and the surrounding woods over the next few days. No sign of Walton was found. There was no evidence of a disturbance where the mystery craft was said to have appeared. Days later, a reverse charges call came to the home of Grant Neff, Walton's brother-in-law. It was Travis. He was in a phone booth and wanted someone to come and pick him up. Members of the Walton family sped to the scene where they found Travis collapsed and unconscious in the telephone box. After undergoing some medical examinations, Walton was found to be unhurt. Walton said he had woken up in a bed in a strange room and found himself surrounded by strange alien beings. His description of them recalled that of classic alien greys, although he described them as wearing red boiler-type suits. Walton claimed to have scared the beings off after brandishing a glass-like cylinder he found by his bedside. Afterwards, he wandered through the ship, encountering a mysterious planetarium-like room before meeting a human wearing a strange helmet. The human led him out of the ship into a large hangar full of other disc-like ships of varying sizes. There, he encountered yet more humans who seemed friendly but did not respond to his questions. One of the humans raised a mask to his face, which almost immediately rendered him unconscious. When he awoke, he was lying in the countryside, watching the saucer speed away into the night. In the number 3 spot, it's Barney and Betty Hill. Barney, a 39-year-old black man, worked for the Postal Service, and Betty, a 41-year-old white woman, was a supervisor for the Child Welfare Department. Because Barney had ulcer problems, the two had decided on a vacation into Canada. On September 19, 1961, they began their journey back home. At 10 p.m., Barney, who was driving, saw a star which seemed to be moving erratically. He told Betty about it, and they both kept an eye on it as they drove along. Just north of North Woodstock, Barney noticed that the star was moving in a very unusual manner. When they arrived at Indian Head, Barney stopped the car and got out to have a better look. Using binoculars, Barney zoomed in on what he thought was a star. This, however, was no star. Barney could make out different colors of lights and see several rows of windows around the flying craft. The object moved closer, and now Barney could actually see people inside the craft. The next thing the Hills recalled was being frightened by the unusual flying object and the occupants inside of it. The next thing the Hills recalled was being frightened by the unusual flying object and the occupants inside of it. Barney hurried back to the car where Betty was waiting. He jumped in and raced down the highway. Looking for the object, they found it was now gone. As they drove off, they began to hear a beeping sound. Although they'd been driving only a couple of minutes, they were 35 miles down the road. Betty and Barney finally arrived home safely. After seeing the UFO, the rest of their trip home had been uneventful. They were tired from their journey and immediately went to bed. When Betty awoke the next day, she phoned Janet, her sister, and told her about the strange object they had seen. Janet urged her to call Peace Air Force Base and tell them what her and Barney had seen. After hearing Betty's report, Major Paul W. Henderson told her the UFO was also confirmed by our radar. Soon, Betty began to have nightmares. In her dreams, she would see her and her husband being physically forced into some type of craft. Before long, 2 writers heard about the Hills story and contacted them. The Hills, with the aid of the writers, compiled a time chart of the events of September 19th. There was now no doubt that the couple had lost 2 hours of time somewhere. Because of the missing time and the desire to know what, if anything, had happened during that time, the Hills decided to contact a psychiatrist. They decided on Boston psychiatrist and neurologist Dr. Benjamin Simon. Well known in his field, Dr. Simon suggested the Hills undergo regressive hypnosis, which would hopefully unlock the memories of the 2 missing hours of time. The sessions began with Betty, and soon Barney followed. Betty exhibited considerable emotional distress during her capture and examination. Simon ended one of the sessions early because tears were flowing down her cheeks and she was in considerable agony. Barney's sessions were less agonizing, for he had his eyes closed majority of the time during his abduction. Barney did, however, put emphasis on the being's eyes, at one point even saying, "All I see are these eyes. I'm not even afraid that they're not connected to a body. They're just there. They're just up close to me, pressing against my eyes." After 6 months of treatment, it was Dr. Simon's opinion that the Hills had been abducted and taken aboard an unknown craft. Some of the memories that were uncovered from the Hills included that their automobile had stalled on the road, the UFO had landed in the middle of the road, and alien beings came to their car carrying both Barney and Betty to the UFO. They were subjected to various medical and scientific tests. Before the aliens released them, they were hypnotized in order to keep their capture a secret. During the intensive regression sessions, the Hills would describe their captors as ball-headed alien beings about 5 foot tall with grayish skin, pear-shaped heads, and slanting cat-like eyes. This description very much described what would become known as the Greys, now a standard description for the small beings with large heads, small mouths, and little or no ears and hairless. Also, details were released about the actual procedures performed on the Hills. Both physical and mental experiments were conducted. Samples were taken of their skin, hair, and nails. Betty had gynecological testing, and Barney reluctantly revealed that sperm samples were taken from him. Even today, in 2016, the Barney and Betty Hill case is still discussed in great detail and often has newer abduction cases compared to it. In the number 2 spot on the list is Peter Khoury. Peter Khoury migrated to Australia from Lebanon in 1973. He met his future wife Vivian in 1981, marrying in 1990. What possibly might be Peter's first encounter with the UFO occurred in Lebanon in the summer of 1971 at age 7. He and 7 other kids had gone up onto the flat rooftop of his neighbor's house to play. Peter was the last to walk through a heavy door that led onto the roof. He then saw all his friends frozen like statues in front of him, while a silent egg-shaped craft hovered above. All 8 children later found themselves on the ground floor after some time had passed, with no memory of what had happened. In Sydney, during February 1988, Peter and Vivian saw a strange light doing extraordinary movements in conjunction with a beam of light effect. On July 12, 1988, a frightening and life-changing alien abduction experience occurred. Khoury was on his bed and was overwhelmed by paralysis. A number of beings became apparent around him. One of them, a tall, thin, golden yellow-colored being with large black eyes. The being inserted a long, needle-like object into the side of Khoury's head, who soon blacked out afterwards. Sometime later, he regained consciousness and rushed into the adjoining room where he found other family members in a switched-off state. Waking them, Khoury found that while he thought only 10 minutes had passed, in reality, it was somewhere between 1 to 2 hours that passed. An injury to his head was also verified. At that time, Khoury had no real context to anchor his disturbing experience. Eventually, he became aware of abduction experiences and entered the UFO field to initially understand what happened to him. Frustrated with the problems and politics that plagued his association with UFOlogy, he formed a support group, the UFO Experience Support Association, during April 1993. Despite trying to focus on supporting others, Peter Khoury found that strange experiences had continued for him. In retrospect, the most striking one occurred on July 23, 1992. According to diary entries, Khoury had been recovering from head injuries received in a job site assault. At about 7 a.m., having returned to his Sydney suburban home from the train station after dropping off his wife, Khoury felt unwell and lay down on his bed to sleep. He awoke sometime later. He was shocked to see 2 strange women kneeling on the end of his bed. Both were naked. One appeared European and the other Asian. Aspects of their appearance were quite odd. The European-looking woman had a very elongated face and a sharply pointed chin. Her eyes appeared to be blue and 2 to 3 times larger than normal. She had very fine wispy blonde hair that seemed to be oddly blown up. Her skin color was quite light. The dark brown-skinned Asian-looking woman seemed to have almost completely black eyes. Her hair was black and set in a firm page boy style. Although no normal communication occurred, the European-looking woman seemed to be in charge, and Khoury got the impression she was giving the Asian-looking woman some sort of instruction. What followed was quite disorienting for Khoury. The European-looking woman, who seemed to be over 6 feet tall and apparently very strong, reached forward and pulled Khoury's head to her breast. He resisted, trying to pull away. She did this 3 times. Finally, Khoury, trying to cope with the shock and disorienting nature of this experience, bit on her nipple, apparently swallowing a piece from it. The European woman, although seemingly confused, did not react with any pain, and nor was there any sign of blood. She seemed to convey to the other woman that this was not the way things were supposed to happen. Khoury was overcome with a coughing fit. Moments later, looking up again, he found that both women had vanished. The coughing caused Khoury to go to the bathroom to get a drink of water. When he went to urinate, he found it very painful to do so, due to, it turned out, some very fine blonde hair wrapped tightly under his foreskin. Khoury removed the hair and had it placed in a plastic bag with a seal. He did that because he felt there was no way it should have been there. It was unlike his wife's hair. Khoury concluded that something extraordinarily bizarre had just occurred and linked the 2 pieces of blonde thin hair to the strange tall blonde-haired European-looking woman. Even though Vivian had been very supportive of him about his 1988 abduction experience, Peter refrained from telling her what occurred for about 2 weeks. She accepted it far better than Peter did, telling him it was something he has no control over and they would deal with it as best they could. landing in the #1 spot on the list, the Hopkinsville alien encounter. On the evening of August 21st, 1955, members of the Sutton family were entertaining a visiting friend, Billy Ray Taylor, at their farmhouse located near the towns of Kelly and Hopkinsville, Kentucky. Taylor went to an outside water pump for a drink at around 7 p.m. He observed strange lights in the sky to the west. He excitedly told the others about his flying saucer sighting, but no one believed him, instead thinking that he had become overly excited after seeing a vivid shooting star. At 8 p.m., the family dog began barking loudly and then hid under the house where it stayed for the entire event. Heading outside a few minutes later, Billy Ray Taylor and Elmer Lucky Sutton asserted that they saw a strange creature come from the nearby trees. Jerome Clark described the creature as a luminous 3.5-foot tall being with an oversized head, big floppy pointed ears, glowing eyes, and hands with talons at their ends. The figure, either made of or simply dressed in silver metal, had its hands raised. When the creature approached the Taylor home, the men began shooting at it, one using a shotgun, the other using a .22 caliber rifle. The creature, they said, then flipped over and fled into the darkness. Sure that they had wounded the creature, Lucky and Billy Ray went out to look for it. Hendry said that as the men were stepping from the porch, a taloned hand reached and touched his hair from above. They shot at the creature. It was perched over the porch, and it was knocked from the roof. Within minutes, Lucky's brother, J.C. Sutton, said that he saw the same or similar creature peer into a window in the home. J.C. and Billy Ray shot at it, whereupon it too flipped over and fled. For the next few hours, the witnesses would assert that the creatures repeatedly approached the home only to be shot at each time they did. One of the people in the house claimed to have shot one of the creatures at nearly point-blank range and would later insist that the sound resembled bullets striking a metal bucket. The floating creature's legs seemed to be atrophied and nearly useless, and they appeared to propel themselves with a curious hip swaying motion, steering with their arms. Clark said that if the creatures were in a tree or on the roof when hit by gunfire, they would float, not fall to the ground. Hendry said that the family matriarch, Miss Langford, counseled an end to the hostilities, noting that the creatures had never seemed to try harming anyone. Between appearances from the creatures, the family tried to temper the children's growing hysteria. At about 11 p.m., the Taylor Sutton crew decided to flee their home in automobiles. After about 30 minutes, they arrived at the Hopkinsville police station. Police Chief Russell Greenwell judged the witnesses to have been frightened by something beyond reason, not ordinary. He also believed these were not the sort of people who normally ran to the police. Something frightened them, something beyond their comprehension. A police officer with medical training determined that Billy Ray's pulse rate was more than twice normal. There might have been partial corroboration of the Taylor Sutton tale. At about 11 p.m., a state highway trooper near Kelly independently reported some unusual meteors flying overhead, with a sound like artillery fire. Several police officers accompanied the Taylor Suttons back to their home, and according to Daniels et al., the official response was prompt and thorough. In 1998, Carol Ann Barnett said, "By all accounts, the witnesses were deemed sane, not under the influence of drugs or alcohol, and in such a state of terror, no one involved doubted that they had seen something." Police and photographers who visited the home saw many bullet holes and spent shells, and further discovered what Clark described as an odd, luminous patch along a fence where one of the beings had been shot, and in the woods beyond, a green light whose source could not be determined. Though the investigation was inconclusive, Daniels et al. Said, investigators did conclude, however, that these people were sincere and sane and that they had no interest in exploiting the case for publicity. The patch sample was never collected. Police left at about 2:15 a.m., and not long afterwards, the witnesses claimed that the creatures returned. Billy Ray fired at them once more, ruining a window. The last of the creatures was allegedly sighted at about 4:45 a.m. on August 22, 1955. The case earned publicity within hours of its occurrence. The August 22, 1955 Kentucky New Era claimed that 12 to 15 little men had been seen. Clark said that none of the witnesses ever claimed this, rather that the observers had no idea how many of the creatures there were. They could only be certain that there were at least 2 because they saw that number at the same time. Later on, the 22nd, Andrew Bud Ludwig of WHOP Radio interviewed the 7 adult witnesses in 2 different groups. He judged their tale of events as consistent, especially in their descriptions of the strange glowing beings. Ludwig had worked as a professional artist and sketched the creatures based on the witnesses' descriptions. Their descriptions were generally consistent, though the female witnesses insisted that the creatures had a somewhat huskier build than the male witnesses remembered, and Billy Ray Taylor was alone in insisting that the beings had antennae. Hendry described Ludwig's efforts as fortunate because the publicity soon grew so obnoxious to the Sutton family that they later simply avoided telling the story and refused to cooperate with UFO investigators except for Isabel Davis. To date, family members who survived the event rarely talk to reporters or researchers, and as late as 2002, Lucky Sutton's daughter, Geraldine Hawkins, believed her father's account, stating, "It was a serious thing to him. It happened to him. He said it happened to him. He said it wasn't funny. It was an experience he said he would never forget. It was fresh in his mind until the day he died. It was fresh in his mind like it happened yesterday. He never cracked a smile when he told the story because it happened to him, and there wasn't nothing funny about it. He got pale, and you could see it in his eyes. He was scared to death." Thanks for listening, everyone. If you liked our top 10 alien encounter, be sure to let us know down below. And if you have a suggestion for a future top 10, please leave a comment on YouTube, our Facebook page, or our Twitter. The links to those will be in the description. Until then.